Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I am speaking with Dr. Silke Appel-Cresswell, who is a movement disorder neurologist whose work focuses on a holistic approach to the treatment and prevention of brain disorders. She's an associate professor for medicine neurology at the University of British Columbia and the co-founder and director of the BC Brain Wellness Program. Thank you so much for being here. Can I call you Silke?
Yeah, of course. Please do. Thank you for having
Well,
me.
I'm so excited about this because I don't think I'm alone when I say I know what Parkinson's is, but I don't know the details about it. I don't know exactly what it is. So I think that's probably a good place to dig in. Maybe you could tell us what is Parkinson's and who gets Parkinson's?
So anybody could get it, for sure. The older we get, the higher our risk is to develop it. And it's one of the neurodegenerative brain diseases, the second most common one actually after Alzheimer's disease. It affects about 100,000 Canadians. Because it is more common in older age, the amount of people who have Parkinson's, of course, is also going up. In terms of what it is, so it's a neurodegenerative disorder. So the brain slowly kind of is eaten up by this disorder in a way. It affects the entire brain, but it doesn't only affect the brain. It affects other body systems as well. So, for example, the gut. It might, for a lot of people, actually even start in the gut. And then, in terms of symptoms, affect how you're thinking, how you're moving, which is, of course, what most people associate with Parkinson's. So, the shaking and the stiffness and the slowness, bit of like a hunched posture, problems with blood pressure, standing up and then feeling really dizzy because your blood pressure drops, or having problems with your bladder, having problems with constipation, which is actually often a symptom that comes on way before any other symptoms occur. That speaks to this, possibly, at least for a good portion of people, the condition and the process under the hood, starting in the gut many years, if not decades, before any of those other symptoms actually become obvious.
So, part of your work, or a lot of your work, discusses, treating the patient and the caregiver.
Mhm.
So, explain why that's important. Why the caregiver?
So I think that the care partners often fall through the cracks. They are often so busy that it's difficult to advocate for yourself, and they also feel, well, I'm the my partner who's got the condition is the one that really deserves, and rightly, of course, so deserves the attention here. So there's the psychological barrier, I think. Conditions like Parkinson's disease, our social worker Elaine Book, who is just fabulous, she always says Parkinson's is a family affair, and that is absolutely true. Yeah, and the reason why that is important is that there's good evidence to show that if your care partner is not doing well, the person with Parkinson's isn't going to do well. And of course, the care partners then are at higher risk of developing conditions themselves because they don't look after their own health. I see that problem. I know that my parents, my dad has severe Alzheimer's disease, and my mom is, devoted to his care, and it has a huge impact on her life. And in addition to all of that, it is also beneficial for both of them to participate. So let's say we have an exercise class or a music class or some activity, and you can do it together. Well, A, you're more likely to do it because you keep each other accountable, and it is something where you're both engaged. You engage on a level that takes you out of your usual routine. It is hopefully something positive, so it infuses this positive aspects into both your lives. It keeps both of you healthier and fitter. It focuses on what is possible more than what doesn't work.
So, I want to talk about the BC Brain Wellness Program. You
Mhm.
co founded this. It offers free classes to people with chronic brain disorders and their care partners. So tell me a little bit about the BC Brain Wellness Program.
So Jack Taunton, Dr. Jack Taunton, who was the chief medical officer for the Olympics in Vancouver, who's a sports medicine physician, and I were sitting down now about 3, 4 years ago, and we had dinner and said, really, we need to make exercise much more part of what we do in medical practice, not just in sports medicine, where this is obviously key, but in across the realm, really, because exercise is probably the most effective intervention we can do for so many disorders. And if somebody famously said, I think it was Robert Waldinger from Harvard, if exercise was available as a pill, it would be the most prescribed medication on the planet. And I think that is very much true. So it started with that exercise thought, but very soon it became clear actually this is not just exercise. There are a whole range of lifestyle factors and decisions we make in everyday life that have a huge impact on how we feel and how our whole system works, but also our brain. What has really become very clear is that exercise, nutrition, stress reduction, being cognitively active throughout a lifetime, creative activities, sufficient sleep, all those things are incredibly important for our brain health. Social connection, being part of a community is really important. We are social beings. That is part of our makeup that has made us this super, maybe even too successful species on the planet. We cannot live without being social. And now we see that, and this hasn't really been part of what we do in medicine. So despite a lot of evidence, both for what we call primary and secondary prevention, we haven't really entered this into the mainstream of traditional medical care. And so the goals now are several. One would be knowing that exercise and nutrition and sleep, etc., are just so very important for brain health. We shouldn't just leave this to outside the medical system and just, write a prescription for medication and say, oh, by the way, exercise, and then repeat that same conversation the next year. But I think it needs to be integrated into mainstream medical health. And it, in our case with BC Brain Wellness, where we offer those classes, where I write a prescription and say, okay, you go to BC Brain Wellness and you need to do exercise classes, etc. That is then being picked up by the physiotherapist who does an assessment and says, okay, those classes would be good for you, or you can sign up yourself. That, I think, the seamless integration is really key.
It feels like when it comes to, illnesses, diseases, of that, we're never proactive. Like we know that if we eat well and we exercise, we know it's good for us. But is it because we think we're fine right now so we don't have to worry about it? Is that our brain like telling us that, oh, I'm fine, I'm healthy, and I will exercise, I got to do this and I got to do that, I can't go to the gym today, or I can't go for a walk today, or whatever it is, and then boom, all of a sudden I'm sick,
Yeah.
and now it becomes an emergency.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And that's, of course, the main, or one of the main issues. That if we don't address that, then we're going to fail. And so part of that, of course, is also to have that cognitive knowledge that we need to do this. But as you said, most of us do know that. Nonetheless, I think that if you can achieve a culture change where this is just so baked, exercising and eating well and so on is so baked into our everyday life, into how we plan our day, how we do transport, how we plan our cities, how it becomes such a natural part of it, that I think the education piece, and that is something we're doing right now here, is still really important, but it doesn't go all the way. So that is why you need to have a community who does it together. And that speaks to this whole thing of doing it together, for example, with your partner, but it could also be with friends. And one of the things we're looking at will be also things like motivation. What are the barriers to doing this? So the vision of the BC Brain Wellness Program is brain wellness beyond all boundaries. And that speaks to many things, but including to those barriers to actually getting it done. And what we found now is that a lot of the feedback we have received from our participants, and that participant base has grown dramatically. We have, just in the last 3 days of spring registration, we we grew threefold again and have over 1,000 people participating in their classes right now.
Hmm.
It is having it, in this case, having it scheduled, having a community. I think that is just so important. People who expect you to show up. You have this in the calendar. This is a scheduled event. It is not down to chance of whether you maybe feel like a walk at 4 on Wednesday afternoon. No, this is in the calendar, and there are people who expect you to show up, and they know you, and they'll celebrate that you're there. And I think
Mm.
that, fostering that community is really, really important.
I want to talk about how we can help our brain thrive. But before we get into that, during this public health crisis, TELUS has been looking for ways to give back, and one of the ways is we like to find out what our guest is also passionate about. We want to give $500 to Pacific Wild. That is the charity you chose. Can you tell us why you chose Pacific Wild?
Yes, the Pacific Wild is a BC-based charity, founded and led by Ian and Karen McAllister, and it is really about the Great Bear Rainforest. I think we have an incredibly beautiful and precious temperate rainforest ecosystem in our own province, and it really needs protection. I had the incredible, I'd say life changing fortune to be on a sailing trip 2 years ago in the summer to the Great Bear Rainforest. And it was absolutely amazing. The reason why I chose that charity is that it is to remind us that we are all part of this ecosystem.
Well, we're happy to give $500 on your
Thank you.
behalf to Pacific Wild. I want to know more about nutrition. What can we do in our everyday lives to support our brains?
So a lot actually. That does not necessarily mean that we completely, prove ourselves, but in either case, we will be doing better. The chances are good for that. So it really comes down doing this as soon as possible, as you said before. We, because these things develop slowly over decades under the hood, so start today. And the pillars of that really are exercise, so getting moving. You don't have to become a Olympic athlete for that, but just getting out and getting a walk in every day, even that is a good start compared to not doing anything. Obviously, if you can do more, that's even better. Do a variety of things and do something you really enjoy. So my younger one and I, we played a game just of basketball, shooting hoops yesterday, and it's just such fun. You do this for an hour and the hour is gone and you haven't even noticed it. So find something you enjoy, because that's what you're going to actually do. Sleep is really important. We now know that sleep is very much clearing out the junk out of the brain, literally speaking. Is like going with like a power washer going through the brain. So the proteins that build up, that is flushed out during sleep. And sleep often improves if you exercise more during the day and you see daylight. And nutrition is really important, particularly a diet that is high in fresh fruit and vegetables, that has a lot of fiber in it, healthy fats, because the fats are actually important. It's just that you need to choose the right ones. And then really avoid the processed stuff, avoid sugary items, particularly sugary drinks. And I like baked goods, but I just cut it down in tiny little pieces and eat and just savor every little bite of that. So
Mhm.
minimize that.
So when I see something on social media that tells me, oh, you can't have any sugar because it gives you inflammation, which causes cancer, which has this, so you need to do this diet or you need to do that diet. There's so many different diets. And if you click on one on social media, you're going to get inundated with 100 more, right? Do I just stick with exactly what you said, right? Which is what I already know, but I seem to get distracted by all this other noise. How do
Yeah.
we separate the two?
Yes, good question. So, I mean, there's always the next diet around the corner, and somebody is going to advertise the next diet because, that's their business. And I wouldn't even want to call it a diet, because that sounds like something you do for 3 weeks and then go on to the
Yes.
next thing. But this style of eating is really a lifelong change, and it's the Mediterranean diet, or and there are other eating styles around the world and in the so-called blue zones, which you can find in Japan and Costa Rica and various other places, that their essence is very similar, yeah, in that way. And if you look at, for example, the Mediterranean diet, because that is the one that is most and best studied and has probably the most evidence for it, because there have been the most studies and variations of the Mediterranean diet. So, for example, the Mind diet, these have been around for thousands of years, and it takes a while, particularly for when you change your eating styles, to adapt your brain to really enjoy the new ones, because our reward systems in the brain are very much triggered by sugary and fatty foods. This is, I wouldn't say quite as powerful as cocaine, but it's a huge
Yes.
there's a huge impact on the brain. We it is not as easy as just switching. Yeah, and so you have to give it a few weeks to months to really have this change also reflected in how your brain works, how rewards are being triggered. And now, if you before ate the whole whatever sweet or so, or I ate the whole sweet, I might now cut this down in much smaller pieces, but then really savor every bit of it
Right.
and feel
Right.
really good. I probably still have sweets most days, but it's much, much smaller. Or I might choose really dark chocolate, which is actually really good, over some sugary chocolate. So it's good to
Mhm.
look at the content.
And what you're talking about, though, what you're talking about by with this lifestyle change is you're talking about us being preventative. You're talking about us not waiting until we're diagnosed with something
Yeah,
to then get better, whether it be with a
exactly.
pill or surgery or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
And that is the mindset that's hard to. And I say this to you because, for example, I everything you're saying, I feel like I already know, but I have ignored, or I'll do it later, right? I'm too busy to go for I can't go for a walk. I have 3 kids, I'm busy, like I don't have time to go for a walk. I do have time to go for a walk, right? It's like what you said, put it in your schedule. This is what you do at 4 o'clock. You are accountable to yourself or your friend or whoever you're going with, whatever it might be, right? I was diagnosed with cancer 9 years ago.
Mm,
Everything you said is exactly what my oncologist said to me. Like it's uncanny what he said to me. I said, "Oh, what vitamins do I need to take?" And what he said, "You don't, Tamara." He goes, "All you need to do is eat healthy," which you do, "but you need to exercise. And you don't need to run a marathon." That's what he said to me. He goes, "You need to find something you like to do and do it a minimum of 3 times a week." Okay, here's a question, Silky. If I do all of those things, does it guarantee me that I'm not going to get cancer again or I'm not going to get Parkinson's?
it doesn't guarantee it, but if you
Right.
look at, and that is life, right? I mean, that is the
Mhm.
nature of living. We don't have guarantees, which is why we better enjoy every single day and to the fullest. And I'm sure you've thought about this a lot as well. But if I told you that probably it's estimated that a third and possibly more of cases of Alzheimer's disease could be prevented with those lifestyle changes, I think that's a pretty impressive number.
That's huge.
That is huge. And if you think about the suffering, apart from all the financial burden for the individual, the family, the society, but the suffering that comes with that, the brain life that is lost, I think a third is pretty motivating for me. But you're absolutely right. It's difficult to do this as an individual, and it's even more difficult to sustain it, which is where we said we need a brain wellness program, because we need to have something that is structured, that creates that community, that then motivates people, that is ongoing. So, for example, we're planning to have cooking classes. Yeah, and to have those with a nutritionist and a chef, similar to the teaching kitchen model across North America. And then people can do this together, and they can continue growing a skill, for example, so they can take pride in it. We have gardening classes, so it's a whole system, so that your whole lifestyle works together. So you grow some vegetables and then you're looking forward to preparing them. So it's this, you're not just changing one aspect in your life that is then hard to sustain, but you're making a systematic change. And then I really do think that we as the healthcare system have a big role to play as well. Now, I heard your oncologist said this 9 years ago. I think the next level is that it is a always discussed, that it is as discussed as any medication we're prescribing. But the reason why we have the brain wellness program is that we found just saying it is just not going to be good enough. But we have to integrate the offering and the opportunity and a low barrier opportunity to participate in these activities. We have to integrate that with our medical care. And my vision really would be that we integrate those lifestyle opportunities and changes and healthy lifestyle into mainstream medical care. And
Yes.
that's why we did this. And so far, it seems that people are really, we've had enormous growth, particularly during the pandemic. A lot of people have said, look, the program has been a lifeline. And I wouldn't have done all the exercise, and I didn't do as much exercise as I do now because it's in the calendar now. And I know, when I went to the gym before, I actually didn't know anybody. And now I
Mm.
know the people in my group.
One last question. I'm just curious of your opinion on this, or your thoughts, I guess. If we put so much money into healthcare, right? And we have community leaders who are philanthropists who donate, everyday people who donate every day. We donate to cancer care and research, or health, heart health, and all these things, billions of dollars every year. What if we were to start putting some of that money into what you're talking about,
Yeah.
the programs like yours, where we have to relearn how to live a healthy lifestyle?
I could not agree more. If obviously, and as a clinician, I treat actual diseases. This is really important, and we need to support the science, and there is no
Yes.
question in the care. Having said that, the cost of being ill is so much higher than the cost of prevention. The only problem with it is you have to make an upfront investment. But that investment is going to be much smaller than the money you save later on. And once let's say, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's has taken hold of the brain, it is currently impossible to repair that. We don't have treatments that would reverse that process or even slow it down in terms of medications. So our only chance and our best chance is really to start early and to invest into prevention. Now, unfortunately, that often means having trials that would run much longer, because obviously, as a scientist, this has to be evidence-based. These trials would run much longer than the usual cycle of a grant support for research. So, usually you get like funding for 3 or 5 years. But here we need to actually look at longer time frames. And I think that is where the shift needs to happen. We need to have larger trials that run longer. And we need this interdisciplinary collaboration where we bring together, let's say, brain health and heart health and exercise and nutrition. So people from very different disciplines to run those trials. And that is really that, like, if you talk about, I'm turning 50 this weekend, and my dream and my goal really is to get that going. As a scientist, this is what I want to do, because I know that that is going to be the way forward.
Thank you so much. I just so much information that we can all use that will help keep us all healthier and support our community, really, truly. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. I want to mention that you are on Twitter. You can follow Silke on Twitter at Silke, that's Silke, Cresswell, Cresswell. That's on Twitter. And you can learn more about the BC Brain Wellness Program at bcbrainwellness.ca. Silke, thank you so much. Happy birthday. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Tamara. It was such a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.